Chapter 9. Uncivilisation, Jesus. According to the New Testament, the story of Christ occurred within the world of Roman, Jewish and Greek society. In fact, in the Gospel of St. Luke it stated that the sign placed above Jesus, mocking him as King of the Jews, was written in Hebrew, Greek and Latin. It's quite interesting how all three of these cultures, each essential in the development of Western civilization, seem to overlap in this melting pot of the New Testament. As per the last chapter, it may be the case that all three are simply different versions of the same story. Strands of history telling the tale of the rise of city-driven civilization. Jewish life with its laws, trade and literacy. Greece with its various city-states. Rome, the ultimate city-state. When we read the New Testament, this is precisely the sense we get, though most readers often miss it. In Christianity we see a rebellion or an amendment of civilization. In many ways it's more a political movement than a spiritual one, though again in these earlier times the two are thoroughly intertwined. The social and political dimensions are quite easy to see once you start looking. For instance, one of the overriding themes of the New Testament is the difference between rich and poor. In it, the wealthy are hypocrites. The poor, suffering and ennobled. Very similar to the modern haves versus have-nots political debate we often witness now. Again, as with the Jewish or Roman attitude to foreign peoples found in the last chapter, it all seems mundanely similar to modern life once you strip back the ostentation. When indulging in the romance of history, we often forget the humdrum reality it must have all existed in. In the Gospel of St. Matthew we find the following quotes. "No man can serve two masters, ye cannot serve God and mammon. What shall it profit a man, though he should win all the whole world, if he lose his own soul? It is hard for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And moreover, I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God." The poor and needy are failed by civilization, suffering in destitution. Meanwhile, the priests and leaders make a show of their piety with their rituals and public display. Yet in their hearts, they're more concerned with grandstanding, material wealth and self-interest. Quote, "Whensoever therefore thou givest thine alms, thou shalt not make a trumpet to be blown before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, for to be praised of men." These days we would call this virtue signalling. Doing a good act to be seen to be good, to be praised and rewarded, rather than from a genuine desire to help. It's similar to modern arguments about the hypocritical rich, be it celebrities in their private jets preaching about climate change, or wealthy politicians, from their relative comfort, preaching austerity and other such things. It's in many ways identical to today's left versus right arguments over the excesses of capitalism and the failings of the system we're living in. In fact, Jesus throwing the money changers from the temple could be viewed as the ultimate symbol of man railing against crony capitalism. "My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves." The system is corrupt, its institutions misused. For all the laws and showings of civilization, it has lost its true moral compass and soul. However, Jesus goes even further than the modern left versus right blame game and suggests that we're all guilty to some extent. We're all sinners. It's a problem embedded in us all, in all human society. In Jesus, we essentially see a figure coming from within civilization, a Jew from within the Jewish tradition, an inhabitant of the Roman world, trying to simplify and correct the excesses of legal and civil advancement. In fact, it's notable that the Apostle St. Paul in the first epistle to the Corinthians attempts to compel his fellow Christians to stop going before the law courts with their problems. imploring them to solve things amongst themselves in a spirit of compassion. Quote, "How dare one of you, having business with another, go to law under the wicked and not rather under the saints? Are ye not good enough to judge small trifles? Is there utterly no wise man among you? What, not one at all that can judge between brother and brother?" This all returns us to the washing of hands of the last chapter. In response to questions as to why the followers of Jesus did not do this. "Why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread." Jesus responds, not with an appeal to the written law, but with an appeal to higher morality. Quote, "Hear and understand. That which goeth into the mouth defileth not the man, but that which cometh out of the mouth defileth the man." Elaborating further, "Those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, breaking of wedlock, whoredom, theft, false witness bearing, blasphemy. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands defileth not a man." Essentially saying, if I may paraphrase Jesus, that it doesn't matter so much whether a man obeys the law or not. What matters is that he has good intentions, and by extension does good actions. It probably would be better in a practical sense if the disciples of Jesus did wash their hands. I certainly wouldn't like to shop at a bakery ran by Jesus. However, from a moral point of view, he's perfectly correct. If someone chooses to not wash their hands before eating, that's their choice. Whereas the person using the law to enforce their will upon another, they're the one in the wrong. This moral underpinning is something that can often get lost when people get bogged down in the technicalities of the law. It must always be remembered that laws are at best necessary evils. To arrest someone is to use physical force against that person, something in of itself an infringement of that person's rights, and a moral injustice if taken in isolation. However, we may deem it necessary at times to do this in order to protect the rights of other people. If the person being arrested is abusing the rights of others through theft, violence, or some other criminal act, then we deem this use of force justified. It's an unsavoury but necessary tool we must give society in order to protect the good from the bad, the law-abiding from the criminal. However, when we forget that it's only ever a necessary evil, or the people making the laws simply don't care, or deliberately misuse the law, then the legal system and its enforcement becomes a threat to the very freedoms it's supposed to be upholding. The law then being used to force people to live and behave in a particular way. Perhaps being used by a majority to force their will and way of life upon a minority, or abused by the most powerful group in a society to manage and control the rest. Again, the washing of hands example from above serves us well. To use the law to force someone to wash their hands before eating would be an injustice, as it would be an evil carried out against one person, who had posed no threat nor carried out no crime towards another. However, if that same person had, under false pretences, sold or given bread made with unwashed hands to another, then maybe the force of law would need to be involved, as in that case they would be carrying out an act that would possibly infringe or threaten another, and therefore the necessary evil of the force of the law would be needed to protect this potential other victim. The confusion surrounding this simple concept continues to this day. A classic example is governments today using the law to micromanage how people live, stating what they can and can't do, what they should and shouldn't eat, etc., instead of doing their job, which is to protect the individual's freedom to live and to choose. Though, to be fair, things are never quite as simple as this in reality. In the New Testament, Jesus sums all this up incredibly simply. When asked which is the chief commandment, i.e. law, Jesus states, Love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and chief commandment. And there is another like unto this. Love thy neighbour as thyself. In these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets." End quote. The sentiment may seem a little opaque to anyone blinded by the religiosity of the statement. However, it essentially boils down to this. If you view the world with love and good intent, and you care for others the way you care for yourself, then you can't go far wrong. It's a practice that works regardless of belief in God, unbelief, or agnosticism. Again, in essence he's saying, it doesn't matter if you have technically broken the law, as long as you haven't committed an immoral act, as the law itself can be morally wrong if it isn't operating upon moral foundations. If we return to the themes above, we can see that the legal system, though in principle there to protect the individual and uphold justice, can often, through its sheer complexity or misapplication, lead to suppression and injustice, be it minor infringements of freedom, such as a forced compliance with an overzealous health and safety law, or a more serious injustice, such as the deliberate use of a legal technicality to suppress free speech, or the imprisonment of a political dissident by the use of laws crafted to work in favour of the state power against the individual. In the New Testament we see Jesus and his followers echoing a similar sentiment to this, urging a return to the simplicity and humanity of basic moral, emotive judgment, and a break with the complexity of technical written law, be it Jewish or Roman. Therefore the story of the New Testament could be read as the story of people from civilization urging a return to nature, or at least urging a realignment of civilization so that it operates more harmoniously with human nature. Christianity in this regard being a check on the madness of civilization, a return to simplicity, a putting on of the brakes, and a re-evaluation of the overall societal situation. Once again, this is something that most of us can appreciate today. That feeling of being trapped by civilized living and its endless demands, with a wish to escape to the country or some other remote wilderness. The feeling that this way of living isn't natural, that this isn't true freedom. In fact, often at the fringes of society, we see people attempting to drop out of civilization altogether. The stereotypical hippie commune being a classic example, likewise the homeless too. For instance, though many homeless are often forced into homelessness for reasons completely beyond their will, some choose to drop out of the system as they simply can't bear living within it anymore. Sadly, however, in most parts of the world, leaving civilization in any sort of real sense is just not an option, and there's no way of ever returning to true freedom by simply dropping out. If a homeless person follows his or her natural instinct and tries to build a shelter or start a fire, then someone from civilization, a law enforcement officer, or another official of some description, will come and put a stop to this behaviour. If you want to build a house, it has to be officially sanctioned by civilization. If you want to start a fire, it likewise requires permission. If you want warmth, food and shelter, you have to play by the rules, no matter how fair or unfair they may be, or how overly complex or unnecessary they are. In uncharted places far from the reach of civilization, this wouldn't be the case, and man would be free from any such prohibitions. But as civilization has spread, those uncharted places have increasingly rescinded. Therefore, the bearded homeless person on our streets is the closest we ever come to seeing the true face of natural man in our modern everyday life. A mirror we tend to avoid looking into, but that's nevertheless ever present and deeply relatable. In fact, the beard itself is in some sense a symbol of the outside world and of natural man, since for a man to be clean-shaven, he needs to have the trappings of civilization to some extent. A few weeks trekking through the jungle or out on the high seas, without the facilities to shave the face every day, quickly reduces man to his natural bearded state. Therefore, clean-shaven equals civilized, and fully bearded equals outsider, the barbarian at the gate. The word barbarian itself is also interesting in this regard. The general explanation for its etymology is that it stems from ancient Greece, the story being that to the civilized Greeks all foreign languages just sounded like bar, leading to the term barbarian being used as a catch-all for all uncivilized outsiders. We also have words like Babel, of course, which seem to play into this sentiment. However, it's also worth noting that the word barbarian is similar to words like Barbarossa, meaning red beard, barba plus rossa. So perhaps barbarian simply means bearded, which would make slightly more sense, what with uncivilized people generally being bearded by nature. So, the barbarian at the gate theme from popular history, in a very literal sense, is in essence symbolic of the wilderness at the gates of civilization, the bearded homeless man at the gate, or in the shop doorway perhaps, being a modern manifestation of this dichotomy. Jesus, of course, is likewise generally depicted as fully bearded, in keeping with this clash of worlds. Furthermore, he's often shown with long, free-flowing hair. Such aspects of the male appearance are in many ways incidental and superficial. However, they help tap into a recurring archetype in the collective imagination. Often in modern times, the outsider figure, the threat to the social order, takes on this appearance, whether it be foreign threats to Western civilization such as Che Guevara, Osama bin Laden, or the Ayatollah Khomeini, or by people threatening to change our world from within, such as John Lennon in his bearded bed-in for peace phase, or the numerous other hairy hippies, rockers and revolutionaries. Another interesting avenue regarding the etymology of the word barbarian is that it also comes with connotations of cutting, barb meaning to cut, as in barbed wire. There's an obvious relation to hair here too, as in the word barber. It's said that in former times barbers would also perform other cutting procedures, such as the aforementioned castration, bringing us back full circle to earlier themes. In fact, the classic red and white barber's pole, commonly displayed outside a barber's shop, is said to have its origins in the blood-soaked rags that barbers would hang up outside their premises, so it would seem that civilization is associated with cutting in general, with both cutting of the hair and cutting of the foreskin being totemic of belonging to the civilized order. Returning to the topic of circumcision, it's worth noting here that according to the Gospel of Thomas, part of the Nag Hammadi texts discovered in Egypt in 1945, it's stated that Jesus believed circumcision to be unnecessary. His disciples said to him, "Is circumcision useful or not?" He said to them, "If it were useful, their father would produce children already circumcised from their mother. Rather, the true circumcision in spirit has become profitable in every respect." Again, if this account is to be trusted, it would further add to the theme of man returning to his natural state and turning back, away from civilization. The sentiment is likewise echoed in the first epistle of St. Paul to the Corinthians, where it's stated, "Circumcision is nothing, uncircumcision is nothing, but the keeping of the commandments of God is altogether." Paul then further mentions circumcision in the epistle to the Galatians. "Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing at all. I testify again to every man which is circumcised, that he is bound to keep the whole of the law. Ye are gone quite from Christ, as many as are justified by the law, and are fallen from grace. We look for and hope in the Spirit, to be justified through faith." End quote. Further strengthening the sentiment, though in this sense also suggesting a strong tie between the act of circumcision and the state of being under the law itself. Perhaps indicating a very real link between circumcision and the state of citizenship, as per earlier chapters. He prefixes this statement with the following: "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and wrap not yourselves again in the yoke of bondage." End quote. Again, likening being subservient to the law to being in a state of slavery in respect of it. Though we should once again remind ourselves that when we talk of law during this period, we're also talking of religion in the same breath, the two being so imperceptibly intertwined. It's also perhaps worth noting here the attitude Jesus conveys towards things such as work, placing an emphasis on allowing nature, or God, to organically provide for man's needs. Ask and ye shall receive, so to speak. Quote, "Behold the fowls of the air, for they not sow, neither reap nor yet carry into the barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much better than they?" Or this line, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, they labour not, neither spin." We could read this as impelling one to return to an almost animal state of naturalism, an absolutist return to the wilderness. It also ties in with the emphasis Jesus constantly places on faith in the New Testament, the importance of which he also frequently stresses whilst carrying out the many faith healings or exorcisms he performs in the Gospels. A thing that may seem something akin to charlatanism to the more rationally minded reader, but that perhaps has a deeper resonance when one considers the psychosomatic factors that can often be at play in regards illness. As too, with things such as the placebo effect. Again, something that seems to work because of faith, regardless of a person's wider religious leanings. In regard the stress of civilized living, it could likewise be hypothesized that much of the depression, anxiety, and ill health we see in today's world could be a consequence of our lack of faith. Our godless, materialist, atomic soup world, where nothing has any purpose or deeper meaning, which leads us to have confidence in nothing but the certainty of our own death. Sometimes it's nice for someone to come along and say, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." It can have an incredibly powerful effect, both mentally and physically, especially if it's said with genuine confidence or belief, as per the case with Jesus. However, in our rational and sceptical world, such confidence and faith is assumed folly, though the wonders of it, again as with the placebo effect, are clear to see. The worldview in the New Testament even has an almost Buddhist lilt to it at times. "Care not then for the morrow, but let the morrow care for itself, for the day present hath ever enough of his own trouble." End quote. Again, perhaps an antidote to the stress and worry that comes with living a planned and micromanaged life in the city. Likewise, we see a similar attitude with regard to material possessions. Quote, "Freely ye have received, freely give again. Possess not gold, nor silver, nor brass in your girdles, nor yet scrip towards your journey, neither 2 coats, neither shoes, nor yet a staff. For the workman is worthy to have his meat. Into whatsoever city or town ye shall come, inquire who is worthy in it, and there abide till ye go thence." The parallels with the above referenced homelessness, and this idea of leaving civilization is easy to observe. It doesn't seem like very practical advice to forego money and the comforts of civilization, but then again perhaps it really is a question of faith. The sentiment is also markedly similar to the sentiments expressed in the doctrine of communism. The idea of abandoning material possessions and keeping things in common. It's very Christian in ethos. Perhaps, unsurprisingly, like Christianity, communism is another thing that also has deep ties to Jewishness. In fact, the bearded Karl Marx could be another barbarian at the gate, threatening the civilized social order with his communist manifesto. This overlap is also something we see in regards Israel too, with, for example, the kibbutz collective farming communities. One of the early main drivers for Jewish people wanting to return to Israel was their desire to leave the, quote, Jewish professions such as law, accounting, pawnbroking, etc., which was their allotted life in the Western world. to return to a more natural agrarian lifestyle. In essence, a return to the land, ironically expressing the same urge back to nature that the Jewish Jesus expressed in the New Testament. In fact, both of these could be said to be manifestations of the same Jewish spirit. A spirit wrestling with the twin forces of the pull to nature and the pull to civilize. Of course, this Jewish spirit is identical to, or just another strand of, the spirit common to all civilization in general. Likewise, for the Jewish professions above, you could just as easily read city professions. Therefore, in many ways, Israel, with its bearded rabbis and clean-shaven tech wizards, is a microcosm of the wider human struggle to divine the best way forward for society. Returning to the New Testament, it's clear that the archetype of the figure of Christ is something that we can all recognize and embrace to some degree. Nor does it require absolute belief to understand and see these themes. It seems that both Christians and non-Christians often get bogged down in the ifs and whens of the story, as is often the case with discussions about all religion. However, this misses the point in many ways. The meaning remains regardless of whether or not the story is historically or factually true. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. The sentiment holds regardless who said it or when it was first uttered. In fact, what sincere believing Christian would throw this doctrine out and stop subscribing to its tenet upon learning that Jesus never actually said it? This finally returns us to what was mentioned in the first chapter, regarding what I call archetypal Christianity. In many ways, the character of Jesus can be viewed as an archetypal man, symbolic of all men, including each of ourselves. Likewise, the various biblical Mary figures can be viewed as archetypal women, as we'll cover in the final chapter. This doesn't mean that the actual stories are untrue. Perhaps they are completely verbatim. It just provides a broader way of looking at things, a way that doesn't require absolute literal belief in the stories to find personal value in them. It also allows the character of Judas to be viewed through a slightly different lens. In this regard, Judas simply becomes the mirror image of the male Jesus archetype. Jesus is the hero, the ultimate version of man, a man who sacrifices himself for all humanity. Whereas Judas is the anti-hero, the man who, through fear and self-interest, sells out, takes the money or 30 pieces of silver, and betrays Christ, his fellow man, and by extension, the whole of humanity. Having both sides of the story allows us to visualize the processes and emotions involved in both journeys resulting in the same outcome. Jesus hung on a cross or a tree for his willingness and bravery to become a martyr. Judas hanging himself from a tree because of his feelings of guilt and shame. Both are extreme aspects of ourselves, archetypes of man that we can empathize with and learn lessons from. Returning to the politics of the New Testament and how it has themes in parallel with the modern political or economic world, we can see that Judas can stand in for the modern capitalist shill or greedy fat cat. The person putting money or their career ahead of the wider moral concern. Judas is the embodiment of the self-interested materialist, a caricature or archetypal figure representing civilized man at his worst. In opposition to Jesus, the self-sacrificing and conscientious moral crusader, we may view Judas as the enemy, as the bad guy. However, he is part of ourselves, a higher self or storybook avatar representing our pragmatic, materialistic and fear-based aspects. Like it or not, we're all on a spectrum somewhere between Judas and Jesus,